We all take precautions in life. We take every measure to make sure we and our family are safe. But when our worst fears become reality, when lives have been changed forever or worse, lost due to an accident, what next?
When something catastrophic happens to you or someone you love, call us.
When good isn't just good enough, we offer you more than a typical law firm. If you've been injured in a car accident, call us today for a free consultation at 410-814-4600 or visit us online at batesgarcia.com.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of Law and Disorder. My name is Ivan Bates and I am your host. Today we should have a pretty amazing show. We have a young man, a young brother who's been a friend of mine for a number of years. A brother that a number of people in the criminal justice system know, but one of those people who's been behind the scenes handling business in this city for about 20 plus, almost 30 plus years. I'm talking about none other than Neal Janey Jr. He will be my guest today when we talk about this episode of Law and Disorder, about understanding the criminal justice system from the eyes of law enforcement. What do we mean by that? Neal Janey Jr. has been a police officer, worked his way through law school, became an assistant state's attorney in Baltimore City, then became a private attorney that sued the police department, made a lot of money. He then actually was doing such an amazing job, the police department asked him to come and advise them. Then from there, he worked in the Attorney General's office to eventually getting a telephone call from the former mayor, Stephanie Rollins Blake, to be her attorney to help so it could advise her about what's going on with the police department. We're going to talk about that experience and understanding the criminal justice system through the eyes of law enforcement. Once again, this is Ivan Bates of Law and Disorder, and we welcome everybody for coming back again. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, Ivan. As you indicated, I'm Neal M. Janey Jr. Actually, I wasn't born here in Baltimore, to be honest with you. I was actually born in Boston when my father was in law school. I came to Baltimore probably when I was around the age of 2. Okay. And been in the Baltimore, Maryland area ever since.
All right. So what high school?
None other than the City College.
Okay. You so all you poly people out there.
Went to middle school at West Baltimore Middle School, formerly known as Rockland, West Baltimore. And from there went to City College, graduated City, went to Morgan State University. And actually, when I was at Morgan, I dropped out, I think, in my, say, maybe early junior year to become a Baltimore police officer in 1995. And, did 8 years as a police officer. And while I was in the police department, I became a detective. I, worked in the applicant investigation unit. Started off as a patrol officer in the Western District. And finished in the police department after I got my law degree in 2001, working both in the legal affairs division as both a detective and a police officer.
Okay.
And so in 2002 is when I joined the state's attorney's office as an assistant state's attorney under former state's attorney Patricia Jessamy.
All right.
Started off criminal prosecutions in the district court. I actually was the Northwest District prosecutor in district court for a while.
All right.
And then a good friend of mine from the police department, Timothy Dixon, and I left the state's attorney's office, and we started our practice, Janey and Dixon PC, in 2003.
Okay, and Tim Dixon was a former police officer as well, correct?
Absolutely. Tim was a former police officer. He actually left as a lieutenant in the police department to become a prosecutor, and he too is in the full-time practice of law such as I.
Okay. Well, you've given us a great bit already to talk about, so let's back it up a little bit.
Sure.
While in law school, you were a police officer. Tell us about what was that like, being a police officer in Baltimore City during the 90s?
Well, being a police officer, so when I was in law school, I actually was a detective in the applicant investigation unit. And so My role at that time was investigating potential recruits that came into the police department, their backgrounds, to see whether or not people were suitable for employment as a police officer. That process, as I understand it, is completely different today than it was in the 90s. When I was a detective, it would typically take close to a year to properly vet each candidate that would come through trying to be a police officer. We'd go to the neighborhoods, investigate their backgrounds. We would call former employers. We would do a pretty extensive background check to make sure people were suitable to, become a police officer.
So today when you hear that Baltimore City Police Department, they're looking for recruits and they just can't find them, how does that make you feel having had that job in the past? So
it doesn't shock me if the reason why we're not hiring police officers at a faster clip, if the reason we're not hiring people at a faster clip is because of the time that it takes to thoroughly vet a candidate to become a police officer, the fact that they can't fill classes as fast as they want, that doesn't surprise me. In fact, if I'm being perfectly honest, it's probably, they're probably hiring people as fast as they possibly could. Otherwise you would have to forego some of the investigative techniques and procedures in order to get people through quickly, and we certainly don't want that in the police department or in this city. You really do need to investigate and make sure people aren't criminals coming into the police department.
Okay. So while you had that job in the police department, did you know that you wanted to be involved in the criminal justice system? Oh, yeah.
Prior to becoming a detective in the applicant investigation unit, I was a patrol officer in Western District for maybe about 4.5 years. Like most patrol officers, I patrolled patrolled Sector 1, 2, and 3 at the time in the Western District. I handled the routine calls for services for drugs, assaults, robberies, you name it. Just like any other patrol officer. We handled the shootings, we handled the homicides, the first responding officers to those scenes. So I have experience handling all, first responder type calls that any other patrol officer in any of the districts have handled. It was only in year 4 or 5, I believe, that I became a detective in the applicant investigation unit. And so I was involved in the criminal justice system ever since, day one, in 1995 when I got hired as a police officer.
So you were a police officer from 95 to 2001, correct?
2002.
2002. And once you passed the bar, and you immediately become an assistant state's attorney.
Not too long after. I spent some time as I indicated, in the legal affairs section of the Baltimore Police Department after I became an attorney, while I was waiting for my bar results, and after I became a sworn attorney, after my bar exam results came in. And so I did some of the things that typically are done in the Office of Legal Affairs as a young attorney, such as subpoenas, trial board prosecutions of police officers and things of that nature. So I was doing that before I became an assistant state's attorney.
So explain to the listeners what the Legal Affairs Department of the Police Department, what is it?
So the Office of Legal Affairs for the Baltimore Police Department is pretty much the shop that handles all of the civil litigation that comes in suing the Baltimore Police Department, and it is also the shop that handles the administrative prosecutions of police officers. So what a lot of people don't understand is, because I know there's this belief out there that the police department does not discipline officers and things of that nature, nothing could be actually further from the truth. The Baltimore Police Department actually does discipline their officers, and they do it routinely. The Office of Legal Affairs and the attorneys that worked in that office were responsible for bringing those prosecutions against, administrative prosecutions against police officers and having them disciplined from anything from written reprimand, suspensions, to termination.
Okay. So now you've been a police officer. You've seen what it's like to prosecute the officer, meaning with internally prosecute the officers. Then you become an assistant state's attorney in 2002 here in Baltimore City under Patricia Jessamy, correct?
Correct.
Now, once you're there, what did you think about now being a prosecutor working with those same officers?
Well,
Some that you'd worked with previously, and some you may have had in administrative boards.
Well, I never. Fortunately for me, I never had an officer that I had dealt with in an administrative board actually be an officer in one of my cases. So I was fortunate for that. But being a prosecutor and to answer your question, there really was no. You asked me how did I feel. I don't know that there's a feeling that you get. I mean, I think the only thing that I was able to do a little bit better was I could understand the cases that came in. I could understand the officers' reasonings, the officers, I knew the officers' training. I knew all of that stuff in advance. So I didn't have to guess, what an officer was looking at or what an officer was considering when he or she made an arrest and things of that nature. And I could also make a quick assessment, when an officer has made a mistake or when the case was no good. I think most of the people who remember me as an assistant state's attorney back in, those days, if it was a bad case, I had no problems getting rid of cases, and things of that nature. Officers make mistakes all the time.
Okay. So with that experience, that's pretty unique because you've been a police officer. You know what it's like internally and how the internal workings of the police department work. And now you're a prosecutor, so you've seen all that come together. How long were you a prosecutor before you went and started your own law firm?
Probably maybe about 14 months. And then I ended up starting my own practice with, like I said, my friend Tim Dixon. And we started to actually do a little bit of criminal defense and things of that nature.
Okay. And eventually you began to sue the police department, correct?
So, eventually, it got to a point where we did bring several cases against Baltimore police officers, not necessarily the police department.
Police officers.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so what people need to understand is a lot of times you don't sue the Baltimore Police Department because under the state of Maryland, the police department is still a state agency. And as an entity, the entity itself has immunity from suit. So you can't bring direct suits against the police department in state court for state matters. It's a little bit different in federal court for federal, what we call Section 1983 claims, but for state torts and things of that nature, you typically don't sue the actual police department itself. You sue the individual officers.
So how many individual officers do you think you end up filing lawsuit against?
It's kind of hard to tell. I didn't keep a number. What I'll tell you is the first case that we took in. So let me just back up a little bit. It was never really our intent to have a full-fledged practice suing Baltimore police officers or police officers in general. The first case that we ended up handling actually came from a police officer when her father was arrested for making an alleged false statement. It was a I can't remember his age, and I won't say his name, but it was a 70-plus-year-old man who had reported his vehicle stolen and from out front of his door. And I think he lived somewhere up in the Dickey Hill Forest area, the Southwest District of the Baltimore Police Department. And so he reported his vehicle stolen, and the officer comes out and, takes the report like normal. And it's just a typical case. And so within hours, the officer goes and apparently he makes a call or something and finds out that the vehicle had been recovered and was at the city yard and was sitting in the impound lot. And, rather doing a thorough investigation about how the vehicle got there and things of that nature, he returns back to this man's house and accuses him of lying and arrested him for making a false statement. And, little did he know his daughter was a Baltimore police officer His daughter contacted myself and Tim Dixon, and when we heard the case, we thought that there was some merit into bringing a suit against the officer. One of the things that the officer didn't look into at that time was there was this thing that sometimes people can have a vehicle stolen, and it be recovered by the police before you even knew that it was stolen. And obviously, the police don't bring the vehicle back to your home. They have it sent to the city impound lot. And so it was nothing uncommon that an officer would call what we call the hot desk back in that time and find out that the vehicle was sitting in the city impound lot. But instead of going through that particular process or that particular procedure, what this officer decided to do was, after he discovered that it was at the impound lot, return back to the 70-year-old man's home, accuse him of making a false statement, placing the handcuffs on him, and marching him out and sending him to jail. And back then, when this particular case was brought, that was before they had worked out several of the kinks in the central booking system. And so this man spent 4 days in jail. For allegedly making a false statement when in fact he clearly did not make a false statement.
So you took suit against the Baltimore City Police officer?
Yes, we sued the police officer.
And then what happened?
Well, we go through the litigation. We actually tried this case to a jury, circuit court for Baltimore City jury, and that jury awarded $500,000 in compensatory damages and $500,000 in punitive damages.
For $1 million?
For $1 million.
Ooh. So based on your background, just think about it. You were a police officer. You learned the interworkings of the police department. Then from there, you become a prosecutor, and now you're sitting there on the other side of the table, basically holding the police officers accountable. Wow. Right now, that's an excellent spot for us to stop. We're going to go ahead and take a break. Once again, my name is Ivan Bates with our special guest, Neal Janey Jr., an amazing lawyer and a good friend of mine, and this is Law and Disorder. Thank you.
I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry to the guy in the car that jumped the light and sideswiped me. I'm not sorry that my serious injury, my suffering, is a problem for you. I'm not sorry there's a dent in your car. Not sorry you didn't see me. But you'll be sorry when you hear who my lawyer is.
Bates and Garcia. When good isn't just good enough, we offer you more than a typical law firm. Call us today for a free consultation at 410-814-4600 or visit us online at batesgarcia.com.
Welcome back. The first part of our show, we introduced you to Neal Janey Jr., and he gave you a little bit of his background from being a police officer. I'm going to also say a city grad, Baltimore City police officer, to an assistant state's attorney, to also working with the police department, some of the trial boards and holding officer accountable. And when we finished, he was telling us about a lawsuit that he filed against the police officer where they were able to have a verdict of $1 million. So, Neal, you've seen a lot in terms of what's going on in the police department. You've seen it from all different sides. How long were you and Tim Dixon, how long were you two in business?
So our practice lasted for about 5 years.
Okay.
And then in 2008, I was asked, I was given an opportunity to come back to the city of Baltimore as an assistant city solicitor and eventually chief solicitor to represent the police department.
Okay.
So
you were beating the police department. And think about it. You have all this experience. Your first case out the gate is $1 million jury verdict. I'm sure you had a number of other jury verdicts against the Baltimore City police officers. And when you have a verdict such as that against the Baltimore City police officer, who pays that? The officer? Does the city? Who takes care of the officer?
Well, typically when you get a verdict against a Baltimore police officer, if the police officer is acting what's called within the scope of employment, the city of Baltimore pays the verdicts, or the judgments rather. And so there's other processes that go on, after a verdict is rendered. But essentially, whenever there is a judgment, whatever the judgment is settled upon, whatever that number or that dollar figure is at the end of the day, the city of Baltimore pays it.
Okay. So it's clear then the city of Baltimore didn't want to keep paying you, so then they hired you.
I don't know it was necessarily that, but
the same people you were fighting against then tap you on the shoulder to say, "Hey, why don't you come on back on this team?"
That's sort of how it did go, but I don't know that was their reasoning. Is, hey, let's stop this guy from beating us. I'll tell you, I took the opportunity to come back. Because when you sue police officers or engage in things of that nature, it's never really about the money. I mean, obviously, money is the only thing that you can do to have your clients compensated for, having their rights violated and things of that nature. But you really engage in that type of stuff to try to sort of help or bring attention to issues that you believe are going on, and so. When I had an opportunity to come back to represent the police department, I viewed it as an opportunity to come back and sort of be on the inside and try to fix problems or advise against problems before they actually manifest themselves and come out and affect the citizens.
Okay. So you're an assistant deputy city solicitor, correct?
No. I was when I came back, I was an assistant city solicitor.
Assistant city solicitor.
And in that role, when I came back out, almost immediately became an acting deputy chief counsel to the Baltimore Police Department. Okay. Because you have different roles that are assigned to you. So my job was an assistant solicitor, but my assignment was at that time acting deputy chief counsel to the Baltimore Police Department.
Now, in the city solicitor's office, there's some history there in reference to your family, correct?
Oh, yeah. When I was a kid, my dad was at the city solicitor of Baltimore under former Mayor Kurt Schmoke.
Okay. So your father, I guess it wasn't just the job, but it was also going back to the job in the organization that your father once led.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you're in 2008, 9?
2008.
2008, you're basically the chief counsel for BPD, the Baltimore City Police Department. What was that job like?
So, it was deputy chief legal counsel. We also had a chief legal counsel.
Okay.
So when I first got there, I was an acting deputy chief, and there was an acting chief counsel. And then eventually, a year later, it was installed a permanent chief counsel, and then I became the permanent deputy chief counsel to the Baltimore Police Department. And so my specific role when I took that job was to direct the litigation efforts of that shop. And so, in that particular role, I got an opportunity to see the vast amount of litigation that was coming in suing police officers. And myself and a team of attorneys that I supervised were responsible for representing the agency when the agency ended up being sued, because some of these cases were brought in federal court where you can sue the Baltimore Police Department directly, managing outside counsel who got assigned to represent the individual officers. But in 2008, when I got there, I actually had to represent the individual officers myself.
Okay.
So from 2008 to approximately, I'd say 2010, that representation was put on the attorneys that were actually assigned to my unit, and we actually represented the individual officers. So we actually could see the lawsuits that came in, the allegations that were made. We researched, the facts of those particular cases and things of that nature, and then had to defend these officers in court.
Who was the police commissioner back then? Do you remember?
Sure. When I got there, Fred Bielfeld was the police commissioner.
So, based on your experience and where we are today with the Baltimore City Police Department, consent decree, gun trace task force, lack of trust from the citizens in the community, could you see back then in 2008, 2010, that the police department was headed in that direction where we are?
No. If I'm going to be honest with you,
okay.
No. obviously, representing the police department, and even with the opportunity to see some of the allegations that were made against police officers, you have to remember sometimes we were pretty successful and we'd actually win some of these cases in court and things of that nature. And so I think people confuse success or lack of success in a courtroom based on evidence with being truth and untruth, if that sort of makes sense. I think people confuse sort of what happens in the legal process with what actually happened in reality. There were cases that obviously we won and we won, or that we probably should not have won. There were cases that we lost that we probably should have won. There's cases that are settled when officers hadn't done anything wrong, but just the complexities with juries and things of that nature, cases got resolved without actually going to a jury, because juries, you can sometimes guesstimate how juries will come out on things. So, a lot of times people will, look at the statistics that come from that, the numbers that come from that, and make certain conclusions. And the conclusions that are drawn are probably the furthest thing from the actual truth. Were there issues where, officers may have been too aggressive or was mistaken in their authority or when they can make arrests? Of course. I mean, that happens all the time. They're not perfect. But, where there are times where people actually, won cases or got settlements and they did exactly what the officers charged them with, and they were actually technically guilty, or they actually did the crime, but were just found not guilty or had a case dismissed because of, the discretion that's given to prosecutors. Absolutely, that too. Okay.
So how long were you a deputy chief legal counsel at Baltimore City Police Department?
So I was acting deputy from, I believe, 2008 to 2009. I think in 2009 I became permanent deputy, and there was a permanent chief counsel at the time. And I think in the last I'm going to say maybe 8 to 6 months, I was acting chief because the permanent chief counsel had left, and I became acting chief. And then not too long after that, I left and became an assistant attorney general for the state of Maryland.
Okay. So you represented the police department. Who was the mayor?
So when I started, Mayor Sheila Dixon was the mayor. When I left in 2013, Mayor Rollins Blake was the mayor.
Okay. So you're at the Attorney General's office. What are you doing at the Attorney General's office?
So, not surprisingly, I was an assistant attorney general and was representing the Maryland State Police.
All right. So when you represent the Maryland State Police, so you've really kind of understood law enforcement, state side, local, everything that's going on. Who's the police commissioner when you're over there at the Attorney General's office? Was it Batts now?
It was Batts now. Okay. And when I left in 2013, Anthony Batts was the police commissioner at that time. Okay.
So how long were you at the Attorney General's office?
Stayed for the Attorney General's office maybe about 13 months, and then I transitioned to practice in the District of Columbia.
Okay. But I think you got a call sometime in 2015. 15.
Yeah, so in 2015.
Was this after the Freddie Gray incident?
It was after the Freddie Gray incident.
So you get a call in 2015. Tell us about this call.
So I get a call from a good friend of mine who happened to be the chief of staff for Mayor Rollins Blake, Calliope Parthemos. She and I went to law school together. She actually came out a year before me. And
all right, we're going to give a shout out to Callie.
Yeah, good shout out to Callie. That's my buddy. And
both of us, a good friend of both of us, we've known, very involved in city government for many years.
Absolutely. And, she asked me would I, consider coming back to be Mayor Rollins Blake, Director of Public Safety, as well as Director of Mayor's Office on Criminal Justice.
So when we hear CJ.
That's the Mayor's Office on Criminal Justice.
Okay, all right. So what did you say?
Initially, I said no. I was okay. I was doing, pretty well. in D.C. So I initially said no. And, after further discussions and, an opportunity to sort of help the city out, at that time they were being investigated by the Department of Justice. It was pretty foreseeable that there would be a consent decree or, findings against the Baltimore Police Department.
And this was something that Mayor Rollins Blake, she asked for the federal government to come in and investigate, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And actually, there were several stages. I think the first ask of the federal government to come in was a sort of lower level ask, which was to help the Baltimore Police Department, fix several problems within the agency. So the first ask of the Department of Justice to come in was more of a sort of lower level thing where you come in and you'd help the police department reform itself, more of a working partnership. And then I believe after the Freddie Gray incident, the mayor was like, no, why don't you come on in and investigate and do the full-fledged investigation.
Okay.
And so that's how, we get to this point, where consent decrees and things of that nature. Rollins Blake asked, for the DOJ to come in full-fledged and do the investigation. And then after that, not too long after that, I got a call from a friend of mine, like I said, Calliope Parthimos, who was the mayor's chief of staff, asking whether or not I would come back and be the director of public safety and director of the mayor's office on criminal justice.
Okay. Well, right now, I want to go ahead and take another short break. We're here with a good friend of mine, Neal Janey Jr. He's talking about his job, his experience on the law enforcement side, from being a police officer to suing the police to representing the police. And now he gets that Hail Mary call from the mayor at that moment in time, Stephanie Rollins Blake, saying, hey, we have a lot going on for our police department, the federal government's looking, and we need your help. We come back, we'll talk about what that job entailed and what happened. And once again, this is Law and Disorder with your host, Ivan Bates.
We all take precautions in life. We take every measure to make sure we and our family are safe. But when our worst fears become reality, when lives have been changed forever or worse, lost due to an accident, what next?
When something catastrophic happens to you or someone you love, call us.
When good isn't just good enough, we offer you more than a typical law firm. If you've been injured in a car accident, call us today for a free consultation at 410-814-4600 or visit us online at batesgarcia.com.
Welcome back to Law and Disorder with Ivan Bates. When we left off, we had Neal Janey Jr. He was talking about a call he received from then the chief of staff for Mayor Stephanie Rollins Blake. Miss Callie Parthimos gave you the telephone call, and then she said, hey, we need you back. What can you do? How can you help us? And this was after Freddie Gray. So for all of those that were in Baltimore City, many of us during that time period, it was just seemed like it was chaos and people were trying to figure out what was going on with the police department. What exactly did your job entail?
So when I came back to Baltimore in 2015, it would be October of 2015, several things were going on in Baltimore that the mayor had asked me to, sort of take the lead and direct, City Hall's efforts in these particular incidents. And one of the things was there was an active Department of Justice investigation going on into the practices of the Baltimore Police Department. So she, definitely wanted me to sort of look into what was going on with the Department of Justice, what was going to be the likely results of this particular investigation, and, how we could get ahead of fixing things. She wanted to be proactive about fixing some of the problems that we knew that the Department of Justice would find. And so I was part of a team of professionals sort of leading that effort. I mean, at the time, Kevin Davis was your police commissioner. He has his team over there at the Baltimore Police Department, and we were sort of all working together to try to figure out how we could fix some things in advance of the findings, because we knew when the findings came out, there would be other things that we had to fix, and so there was no need of delaying or waiting for, these particular findings. And so one of the things I was asked to do after the findings came out was be a part of the negotiation team in drafting the consent decree.
Okay. Now, let me ask you, you have a great deal of experience. I don't really know anybody that has as much experience for the past 20 years involving law enforcement, specifically Baltimore City Police Department. Could you see a decline in the department from when you first became an officer to where it was at that moment in time in 2015, 2016 in terms of the culture?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the department changed. I mean, the culture of the department changed. One of the things, and I think I speak for many police officers that still work the street. One of the things that officers do not particularly care for is for politicians to play politics, with their jobs, their lives, their livelihoods, and we would prefer that politicians, would be honest with the citizens of Baltimore about certain problems that are going in the city. This notion that, the police department is all bad and the neighborhoods are complete victims of this police department, that started to be the message after a while, and no police officer wants to see that. The police officers are not out there trying to victimize people. Now, obviously, we have the gun chase task force who obviously were victimizing people and things of that nature, but those officers typically do whatever they do away from the vast majority of the officers. So it's not like we're all sitting there on the street and we're watching people violate people's rights and not saying anything. That doesn't happen. When you get things like the gun trace task force or some other officers that have been accused and convicted of violating people's rights, these officers typically go off with other officers that are participating in this stuff with them. They do it away from the vast majority of us, and so we don't know about it. We don't see it. You'd hear rumors in the street, by some people who are involved in the criminal element, hey, these officers are doing that, but we don't have evidence of that sitting right in front of us for which we could then act on.
Okay. So you would probably say that there's a small amount of the officers that are out there doing that on a regular basis.
Yeah, I would have to conclude that it would be a small amount of those officers. I mean, again, the media does a great job in pinpointing every time an officer does do something wrong. And so it does seem to appear that every one of them are doing something wrong. But the reality is it is a small amount. The vast majority of officers do not know specifically what these officers are doing. These officers go through great lengths to keep it away from their supervisors and their side partners and things of that nature. They go through a great length to keep it away from them. So we just don't know.
Okay.
So to your original question is yes. So over the years, when that messaging comes out, oh, the police department is bad, oh, the police department is dirty, oh, the officers are out there violating people's rights, they're hurting people, they're harming the community, all of a sudden you have a DOJ investigation into the behaviors of the police department and things of that nature. You can see over the years the decline in morale and things of that nature.
Now, you worked in terms of working with the DOJ, and they did this report, correct?
So, yes, the Department of Justice does the findings report. We don't necessarily work with the DOJ while they're doing that. Yeah. Where the lawyers for the city and where I got involved was negotiating the terms of the actual consent decree.
So in negotiating terms of the consent decree, one of the things that the report really talked about was basically how there was a history with the police department violating people's constitutional rights. Do you think that was the issue of the officers' poor training, or that was just how the police department was being handled? Just violate their rights, the ends justify the means.
So it definitely was a part of training. Again, I will tell you that the vast majority of officers do not go out with a specific intent to violate people's rights. I mean, if you believe that, then you just don't need a police department at that point, because. So it was training. Okay. And it was, sometimes a disconnect between certain subjects that officers get trained on, and then, sort of merging that with the realities of trying to enforce this stuff on the street. What people have to understand is lawyers, people like you and I, politicians, whomever, we have the opportunity to look at these policies and look at these trainings and things, sort of in the comfort of an office and things of that nature, and figure out what an officer should do, how they should do things, and train them accordingly. It is a little different when the officer gets that training and has to try to implement that in milliseconds, in seconds, in real time on the street. We can only sometimes guesstimate the types of scenarios that officers find themselves in, but there are nuanced factual situations that you simply can't train for. Like, I could train for somebody who has a gun, okay, and what should you do if they have a gun, but you can't necessarily train for what the officers are going to do with a person who has a gun, and there's 25 kids running around, and there's wooden doors all around, and this guy's shooting at the officer, and then the officer doesn't have any place to sort of take cover, and he's also responsible for the safety of the kids running around trying to find cover. That type of chaos, you can do your best to try to train for, but the nuances of those factual situations simply can't be trained. And I just use that as an example, but just about every situation that an officer finds himself in, or himself or herself in, factually, there are just nuanced fact situations in real time that simply these officers can't possibly have been trained for.
Okay. So with your job with the mayor at that moment, back in 2015-16, you're working to negotiate the consent decree. Tell the listeners what that was really all about, because you guys were the ones that started the process, correct?
Well, correct. I mean, you're talking about the mayor's office asked for the investigation. Yeah, so I was on the initial team, negotiating with DOJ attorneys the actual provisions of the consent decree. We had an outside law firm representing the city of Baltimore at that time, myself, and at that time, the deputy solicitor, David Ralph, and a couple other attorneys. And the police department had their representative. At that time was Deputy Police Commissioner Jason Johnson, who was also an attorney. Okay. We were all in there negotiating the specific language of the consent decree, terms of the consent decree, and things of that nature. But when Mayor Pugh was elected, the team sort of changed a little bit, because she brought in her people for her administration, and some of us transitioned out. I was one of the people who left, and so my involvement in the drafting of the consent decree was really, for the most part, the first half of the consent decree. Okay. And then afterwards, I returned back to D.C. to practice law when Mayor Pugh, announced that she wanted to bring in her new team of people and things of that nature.
Okay. Now, you worked on the consent decree, but you weren't part of the team that finished and put the final part out and put the final consent decree out.
Correct. I mean, I can look at the terms of the consent decree and know that some of the terms and conditions that were being negotiated on the front end actually made it into the final draft. So certainly I participated in that, but no, I was not there when it finished. Okay. Deputy solicitor, and at that point, acting solicitor, David Ralph, and some other people, I would presume Jason Johnson and some other people, finished it out.
Okay. All right. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is MOCJ. And the reason I want to ask you about that is because you hear a lot that the mayor, Catherine Pugh, right now, she doesn't have anyone in that position. That I want to know what that position does. Is it important? Mayor Pugh's been in office now for about 3 years. 2.5 years, a little more than 2 years. During that time period, this is a position that's only been filled for maybe about 9-10 months. So it's almost 1 year that this position at MOCJ has not been filled. What exactly is that job? What is that position? What do you really do? And is that an important position? Because there was a person, former Deputy Police Commissioner Anthony Barksdale. It was rumored that he was potentially going to fill that position. I mean, and there's a lot of confusion on social media about what that position is. Why don't you give a little background about that?
So the Mayor's Office on Criminal Justice, I do believe, is an important position. But, let me sort of clarify a couple things. One, I don't have any specific facts on how long it's been unfilled and things of that nature, because she did have a director in there.
Mr. Drew Vetter.
Yeah, Drew Vetter. Yeah, so, how long someone's been there under her administration, I really have not followed that. I will say that the position is important, but let me also clarify. The Mayor's Office on Criminal Justice really is whatever the mayor at the time wants that position to be. So it is taking on various forms. It has never been just one thing all the time. When I became director of the Mayor's Office on Criminal Justice, I was also acting as the director of public safety, and the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice was different under me than it was under the person that was there before me. It was different under the people that were there under former Mayor Dixon. So it has changed over time, and it's really what the mayor wants it to be. But the reason why I say that it's important is because the job of the mayor, the role of the Mayor's Office on Criminal Justice is sort of to support the police department, to think of criminal justice policies from a sort of holistic view. With the police department being actively involved in the day-to-day enforcement of laws, your sort of typical criminal justice system, lock people up, put them before the criminal justice system and things of that nature. The Mayor's Office on Criminal Justice was sort of a unit that would look into how to reduce the number of arrests, look into how to make more quality arrests, look into policies, programs, and procedures to avoid arrest and things of that nature, to sort of study issues to see whether or not things are health problems and should be treated different ways. Like, for example, when I was director of Mayor's Office on Criminal Justice, we had a juvenile diversion program, where we tried to interact with juveniles right at their first instance of contact with the police department and the criminal justice system, to get them into programs and services and things of that nature to reduce the recidivism. Then we had, a program called HYPE, where, we had a HYPE program where we tracked your more violent juvenile offenses and things of that nature, and we followed these juveniles throughout the course of their interactions with the criminal justice system, providing services and things of that nature to them. We had other services. When I was director, we got into reentry issues. We did a Living Cities project where we try to provide services for people who were coming home from jail and getting them jobs and things of that nature. So those are the types of things that the Mayor's Office on Criminal Justice does. It doesn't try to take the place of the police department, but it does try to find ways to support and assist the community, their interaction with the police department's interaction with the citizens. And then also, one of the things that we were able to do when from the Mayor's Office on Criminal Justice is we studied trends. My deputy solicitor, Sonny Snitcher, saying her last name wrong, but she was a data person, and she could analyze data, and we could look at trends and things of that nature, and talk to the police department about it. And if the police department didn't have plans or things of that nature, we could comb the United States to other agencies that dealt with these issues successfully, and try to bring back ideas to our police department, try to be proactive in things.
All right. Well, right now we're gonna go ahead and take a quick break. We're here with our guest, Neal Janey Jr., who's given his wealth of experience and knowledge about the criminal justice system through the eyes of law enforcement. This is Ivan Bates for Law and Disorder, and we'll be right back in a couple moments.
I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry to the guy in the car that jumped the light and sideswiped me. I'm not sorry that my serious injury, my suffering, is a problem for you. I'm not sorry there's a dent in your car. Not sorry you didn't see me. But you'll be sorry when you hear who my lawyer is.
Bates and Garcia. When good isn't just good enough, we offer you more than a typical law firm. Call us today for a free consultation at 410-814-4600 or visit us online at batesgarcia.com.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Here with our guest, Neal Janey Jr. on Law and Disorder. We've been discussing Neal's vast career and all of his experience with the criminal justice system, but through the eyes of law enforcement. When we left off, we were talking about the MCOJ, Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. I have a couple questions, and then we're going to go ahead and close it out. Looking at the criminal justice system in Baltimore City, do you think it's the mayor's responsibility? Does the mayor's office bear the burden of what's going on in the criminal justice system in Baltimore City now?
So the honest answer to that is no. I don't think that there's one entity that's responsible for the criminal justice system. What we're, in my honest opinion, what we're experiencing now. Well, let me just back up and answer the exact question. I think we all have a collective responsibility for what's happening in the criminal justice system. And what I mean by that, the mayor's office, the police department, the state's attorney's office, citizens, you name it. I think we all have a responsibility. Obviously, the mayor's office is responsible for putting public safety apparatus in place to keep citizens safe, but that aspect of the criminal justice system just can't work in a silo. If there's failings, let's say, in the state's attorney's office and their relationship with the Baltimore Police Department, then it all fails. And then, assuming you were to even get both of those issues or those entities working together and doing what they're supposed to do, then there's other things that affect the criminal justice systems, such as lack of opportunity. Addiction issues, things of that nature. I mean, this is you often hear the mayor talk about she wants to bring a holistic approach. Mayor Pugh says that, Mayor Rawlins Blake used to say that as well. And it will take a holistic approach to fix, the problems that are going on in this city. I think the issue is, what do we mean by holistic approach?
Okay. It's clear that you have a great deal of experience. In closing, what would you want to say to the citizens and understanding what's going on right now with the criminal justice system through the eyes of law enforcement?
Well, what I would say to the citizens
of Baltimore City
is that, look, law enforcement needs your support. A lot of these officers are trying their best. Obviously, we already know that there's issues with some officers in that police department. I mean, you can't ignore, what happened with the gun trace task force and some other incidents that have highlighted some issues. But, in large, the vast majority of these officers are out there trying their best to keep you safe. And what they need is a little bit of support from you.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much, Neal, for coming on of Law and Disorder. You've definitely given us a point of view of law enforcement and looking at the criminal justice system through their eyes and through their lens. It's clear that the system, like I've always said, has three main parts. You have the police, you have the prosecutors, and you also do have the mayor's office. And I guess to me, what I gotten from this is the mayor is sort of like the train station, where the police and prosecutors kind of come in and they need to work together and they have programs to try to help everybody and work one as one. It's also interesting to see how you've been at every single level of this process and you still continue to make sure and understand to be a part of the process, it must be a team effort.
Has to be a team effort, Ivan. There's no one entity that's going to fix this. You could, you're going to get a better police department at the end of this consent decree. But if there's this belief out there that once we get this grandiose, well-oiled machine called the Baltimore Police Department at the end of the consent decree, all the problems are fixed, you're going to be disappointed. Because there's just no one entity in their individual silos that resolves this issue. And, and I'll close on this point, Ivan. And even when you get the whole criminal justice apparatus working as it's supposed to, then you have to address the other issues that contribute to crime, such as lack of opportunity, addiction, and things of that nature. Because what you'll find is once the criminal justice system is working as it's supposed to be, it'll be a great machine to get sort of the people who don't need to be on the street off the street. But it doesn't necessarily prevent other people from becoming criminals or getting involved into the criminal justice system. It all has to work together, and so you have to fix everything.
Wow. So there we are. We all must come together as one, and we have to work together to fix everything. Once again, I want to thank my guest, Neal Janey Jr. I want to thank DMV. I want to thank my listeners, and I want to thank my producer, Mr. Pierre. Once again, your host, Ivan Bates. Thank you. Be safe. God bless. And remember to lift as you climb.
We all take precautions in life. We take every measure to make sure we and our family are safe. But when our worst fears become reality, when lives have been changed forever or worse, lost due to an accident, what next?
When something catastrophic happens to you or someone you love, call us.
When good isn't just good enough, we offer you more than a typical law firm. If you've been injured in a car accident, call us today for a free consultation at 410-814-4600 or visit us online at batesgarcia.com.
Law and Disorder with Ivan Bates is produced by Andy Pierre and brought to you by the DMV Daily Media Group, Maryland's leading podcast network, offering you a wide variety of informational podcasts and programs, including the award-winning daily program, the DMV Daily Radio Show, which airs Monday through Friday from 5 to 6:30 p.m. only on dmvdaily.news. You can find out more information on this podcast and on other podcasts and programs produced by DMV Daily by simply going to the website, www.dmvdaily.news. Be sure to follow DMV Daily Radio on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Google Play, or watch episodes on the DMV Daily Show on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube at DMV Daily News. You can also donate to this independent news outlet by simply going to paypal.me/DMV Daily News.